Okay, our purpose here today is to learn how to hook up our manifolds, and our gauges in particular, to check system pressures. In order to be able to do that, we first got to know how this manifold works. We have to realize that if we turn this high side manifold valve clockwise all the way in, we'll close off the port between the high side and the center chamber of the manifold. If we turn it counterclockwise, we'll be opening the port between the high side and center chambers of the manifold. Okay, so I'm going to start off with them closed. Again, on the low side, if you turn it counterclockwise, you're opening the port between the low side and the center chamber of the manifold. If you turn it clockwise, you're closing off that port between the low side and center chamber of the manifold. Okay, we also need to know how a service valve works. The service valve right here is a three-way service valve, meaning it has three ports. It's got an access port here, it's got a line port here, and it's got another port that goes into the compressor. A port meaning a hole. Okay, so when we go to hook up, we're going to hook the end of our hose here, but I can't just go ahead and take this off right now because refrigerant might spray out. We have a valve stem underneath this protective cap. Put my wrench on it and take that cap off. This valve stem is how we operate this valve. If we screw this in all the way, it goes all the way up to here and closes off this line port. We call that front seating the valve. If we screw it back all the way, it goes down here and closes off this access port. So front seat closes off the line port, back seat closes off the access port. Right now the access port should be closed off, but we're going to double check it before we take that access port cap off. So we're going to try to unscrew it all the way, and yes, it's tight all the way. And we're talking about counterclockwise. Counterclockwise as seen from down here, so that's going to be pushing down here. So that's counterclockwise, it's snug. Now I should be able to take this cap off without a release of refrigerant. Alright, I'm going to take that cap for safekeeping, keep it clean, put it on the back of the manifold. I'm going to take my low side hose, put it on this access port. Now, there's air in this blue hose right now. I don't want that air to get in the system when I open it up to the system. So what we're going to do is we're going to crack this open by running it clockwise just a little bit, enough to let the refrigerant come through this hose. That refrigerant is going to come through the blue hose. I'm going to have the manifold, this one's closed. I'm going to open this one so that refrigerant can go through here, and I'll let all the air escape out the end of this yellow hose. I'll let it do that for a couple seconds, and then I'll close the manifold, trapping refrigerant only in my low side hose. So I'm going to put this on here, and I'm going to turn it clockwise a little bit to crack it open. And here comes the refrigerant. I'm going to close off the valve. The air blew out the yellow hose. So now I've got my blue low side hose connected to the system, and I'm looking at the system pressures right now on the low side. I'm going to do all this the same for the high side. Again, I can't take that cap off yet until I first make sure that the valve stem is completely back seated snug enough so that I don't have a release of refrigerant when I take the cap off. So I'll put that on there and reverse the ratchet, pull it counterclockwise. Alright, it's back seated, so I should be able to take the cap off. I'm going to put it also on the back of this manifold, because when I go to put this hose back on there, I'm going to find it. Put my high side hose end on the access port of this discharge service valve. Alright, now, just like I did on the low side, I'm going to open up that access port. Refrigerant's going to go through here. It's going to go out the yellow hose because I'm going to open up this side. When it goes out the yellow hose, I'm going to tighten it up. Let me untangle for a second. I'm going to tighten it up on the back of this manifold a little bit. When the air blows out of there, then I'm going to snug it up and trap refrigerant only in these hoses. Alright, so I'm going to crack this open by turning it clockwise slightly. That's going to mean pushing it from this point of view. Alright, so the refrigerant's spraying out for a couple seconds, and I tighten it up. Or the air is the main thing to get out, but some refrigerant's going to escape too. So right now what we're looking at, let me close this. The low side hose is hooked up and accessing the low side, and the high side hose is hooked up accessing the high side. these two ports are all these ports are closed off. So all I'm seeing here is low side, all I'm seeing there is high side. I'm ready to plug this unit in and check the pressures. Watch what happens. I'm going to plug it in, look at the high and low side pressures. Low side pressure starts to come down, high side pressure actually starts to go up a little bit. So we're going to check the pressures for diagnostics. If you're doing the lab skill to hook up, you probably got some questions to answer, some things to look at. Alright, so to go disconnect, our goal is to not let much refrigerant out of this system. There's really nothing that prevents us from just simply coming up to this valve stem, back seating it counterclockwise, shutting off that port, and just disconnecting our hose and going on about our business. We could do the same thing on the high side, back seat it, disconnect. We would lose all that refrigerant that's in the hoses. That won't make a difference on a big system, but on a smaller system we want to try to prevent that, so we might be able to find a way to put that refrigerant back in the system. That's what we're going to do. We're going to take the refrigerant in these hoses and put it back in that system. Now, we know that this compressor is sucking in gas on this side and pushing it out over here. So we ain't going to be able to put all this refrigerant back in this side because we'd have to fight the compressor. So since we're not going to be putting it in the high side, or the discharge service valve, I'm going to go ahead and back seat this, turning it counterclockwise. Turning it counterclockwise. Okay? Now, I'm going to come over here and let this high side pressure that's trapped in this high side hose, we're going to let it into the center of our manifold. Now both of these are sitting at high side pressure. They're not connected to the system, but there's some high pressure in it. Now I'm going to open up this port, and I'm going to let whatever high pressure is here go into the low side. So we're sucking it back into the system. So now what I've got is all three hoses are accessing the low side. None of them are, that's not connected. It's connected, but there's no access. The port's closed. So, if there's some way I could get the low side pressure to go down, I could get the pressure of my gauges to go down. Well, just think about it. This compressor is sucking gas in all the time, sucking it down the suction line, going into the compressor. If we could shut off what's supplying that, we could pump down that low side and also pump down our hoses at the same time. Well, we're going to go back upstream all the way to the king valve, coming out of the liquid receiver. King valve is a three-way service valve as well. When you go to take the valve stem cap off, put another wrench up here, because if you torque this too much, you're going to twist this and bend one of these pipes. So we're going to take that valve stem cap off, and now we're going to run this valve stem up in here to plug up that liquid line, which is going to shut off the flow here and allow us to suck our hoses down. So we're going to take this valve stem wrench, put it on here, and we're going to turn it clockwise that way. Now if we look at it from up here, that looks like counterclockwise. It ain't. We're talking about from the bottom. Looking at it from the bottom. It's how you're applying it, not what it looks like. So I'm going to turn this clockwise, 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 and run it all the way up in there. We're screwing it up in there. That's one way of saying it. We call it front seating it. We're screwing it all into the front seat. Alright, that's snug. Since we cut off the supply to the low side, we're going to see these pressures come down. Remember, all our hoses and everything's hooked up to that low side access port, and if we're sucking the pressure down, we ought to see it come down on our gauges. Now, we have a pressure switch over here connected to this system. That pressure switch should cut this off when it gets down to whatever its setting is. Now, I don't want you to let it go to zero. If it goes down to zero, unplug it, because we don't want to suck it into a vacuum and take a chance of air getting in there. But we'll see where the pressure switch cuts it off. Alright, cut it off at 10. I'm going to go ahead and unplug it. Alright, so now we only have 10 psi in our hoses. Now all I got to do is back seat here, suction service valve, screwing it back out, back seating it, and now listen, when I go to release this, just a wee bit of gas coming out. Alright, so we didn't rob the system of too much refrigerant. We can take these access port caps off, put them back on the system, and snug them down. Don't want it to leak out. Also, we got to stow our hoses on our manifold. We want to keep the ends of these hoses from touching the ground. We'd want to keep all dirt out of them. Treat the end of that hose like it's the American flag. Alright, before we can return this system to normal operation, we've got to backseat this king valve again. Otherwise, this is going to be cut off and we won't be able to put anything down the liquid line. So I'm going to put it back on here and we're going to turn it counterclockwise. As seen from the bottom, imagine yourself looking up. What does counterclockwise look like? If you look at it from on top, it's going to look like clockwise. But this is counterclockwise, 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 as seen from the bottom, not from up here. That ratchet mechanism helps you do it quickly. Snug it. I put my valve stem caps back on. Discharge service valve, suction service valve, king valve. Use my wrench and snug that tight. Put on this one, snug it tight. Be careful once again on this king valve. If you tighten it too much, you're going to twist that and bend these pipes that are connected to it. Alright, so we hooked up, looked at pressures. We hooked up without putting air in, and we disconnected without letting much refrigerant out. Don't forget, on larger systems where it isn't critical that you lose a little refrigerant, all we really had to do was backseat both of those service valves and take our hoses off and go on about our business. Alright, do this, or watch this video rather, several times till you get a hang of what's going on. This is going to take practice over and over again to get used to what you're doing and understand how things work. Of course, if you have any questions, just ask. That's all there is to it.